President Biden and leaders around the world, some, not all, it's important to note, are calling for Russian President Vladimir Putin to be put on trial for war crimes. In this past week, footage of hundreds of bodies has emerged from Bucha, a city on the outskirts of the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. Ukrainian authorities blame Putin and Russian troops for committing acts of mass murder of civilians. Alex Whiting joins me now. He is a visiting professor of practice at Harvard Law School. Importantly for this conversation, he served in the office of the prosecutor at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Alex, it's great to have you with us. Let's start with some basics for the audience's benefit. What is the legal definition of a war crime, and who has jurisdiction?
So during armed conflict, there are rules of war that apply under international law, under many national laws. And an intentional violation of those rules, which prohibit, for example, targeting civilians, abusing prisoners, and things like that, an intentional violation of those rules can constitute a war crime. Now, that is applicable across the world, and there's no question about that. What is a bigger challenge is figuring out who has jurisdiction and who can investigate and prosecute the war crimes. In this case, in Ukraine, the International Criminal Court has jurisdiction because Ukraine granted jurisdiction to the court in 2015. Also, Ukraine has jurisdiction to investigate, and they are actively investigating. And also, third states have opened up investigations into war crimes being committed in the conflict in Ukraine.
Alex, as you no doubt know, there are images of what appear to be Ukrainian civilians, bound hands, gunshot wounds. There are video images of mass graves, people shot in the back of their head. President Zelensky said before the United Nations that women have been raped in front of their children, that limbs have been cut out, tongues have been cut out. All of these things seem to be straightforward evidence of war crimes. What impact would that have on any future tribunal investigation or prosecution?
You're absolutely right, Major. These images that have been coming out of Bucha in the last few days are striking evidence of war crimes. Earlier in the conflict, there was evidence of targeting of civilian objects, hospitals, theaters, and so forth. Those are harder crimes to prove because you have to prove that there was an intent to target the civilian object. Here, these crimes appear to be more straightforward. However, investigators will still need to confirm that what we see in the images is actually what happened, what the circumstances are, how these happen, and most importantly, who is responsible. Some evidence appears to be coming out already from the Ukrainians themselves about which units may have been responsible for the crimes in Bucha. But the investigators will want to get on the ground, confirm the facts that appear to be in the images, the crimes that appear to be there, and then try to build a case to determine the responsibility of the units and the soldiers involved.
Alex, it's my impression, and I beg you to correct me if I'm wrong, that you have basically suggested this is a theoretical exercise with the idea of prosecuting Vladimir Putin and convicting him of war crimes, meaning it's highly unlikely. If that's the case, what are the repercussions if the person centrally responsible for starting this invasion and therefore the war crimes that come from it escapes prosecution?
So I would say this about the likelihood of getting Vladimir Putin in a courtroom and holding him accountable for crimes that may have occurred in Ukraine. It's hard to imagine now, and that's why it seems like very unlikely that it would happen right now or in the near term. But it's not impossible, and I think that's important. The history has many examples. Slobodan Milosevic, Charles Taylor, others, leaders who were responsible for war crimes, crimes against humanity, even genocide, who never thought that they would face the inside of a courtroom in The Hague, and one day they did. And it could happen one day, not in the next months, but it could happen one day with Putin also. But it's also really important that the investigation take place now for a number of reasons. First of all, it sends a signal to the victims that what has happened to them is seen and recognized. Secondly, it sends a signal, perhaps to Vladimir Putin, but more importantly, in the short term, to mid-level commanders, to soldiers who may be participating in these crimes, telling them that they are being seen, that their conduct is being investigated, and they could be charged. And while it may be hard to imagine Putin in a courtroom, it's possible that soldiers who participate in these crimes could be held to account. So, and then finally, it's important to do the investigation, to document, so there's careful documentation about what happened, so these facts are established for history. So for all these reasons, even if the long-term goal of getting Vladimir Putin in a courtroom seems hard to imagine today, we have to start the investigation now for all of those reasons.
Alex Whiting, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.